Andrew Pearson, you're under arrest," was the first words I'd heard since being thrown to the ground. My arms were violently wrenched behind my back, and my hands were chained so tightly that I felt they were being severed. I went to answer the front door, but at least 4 uniformed officers barged into my home. I was violently dragged to my feet as 3 more civilians entered my home. "Paper in front of my face, take him out of here, wait," I yelled, struggling to get free of the hands that were holding me. There must be some mistake. I didn't have time to say anything else before being spun around and smashing into the front door jamb. My spectacles went flying. "That is resisting arrest, pervert," growled the officer who had thrown me into the jam. "Hayes," scolded the first man, "just get him down to the booking." So, for my 2 children, Melody, 12, and Tony, 11, the officer who had swung me around into the wall sat in the driver's seat, belted up, and drove away from my house. "Look," I remarked, sitting up in the back seat and groaning from wrist pain, "my kids will be home from school shortly. You don't need anything except to shut your big fat mouth," the cop hissed. "These are my children," I yelled. The next thing I knew, I was slamming into the thick. I was traveling at 35 miles per hour when the cop slammed on the brakes. How my forward movement, what I discovered subsequently, concerned mass and velocity. The cop swung around in his seat and yelled, "Look, scumbag, one more word from you and I'll come back there and beat you to death." By the way, my body cam is turned off. I had twisted my head enough to keep my nose from breaking, but my right cheek was swelling. I remained silent until W. Garage. He locked his weapon and yanked me out of the car and into the booking area. A female cop was waiting for us. "Paperwork?" she asked shortly before the other officer handed it to her. "Whatever happened to him resisting arrest?" muttered the first officer as he placed leg irons on me. She shrugged as if it were no big deal, I exclaimed in relief when she removed the restraints after taking my front and side photos and scanning my fingerprints. She charges? "I'm not sure, no one told me what they are." With a sigh of frustration, she took the papers she was given and began leafing through them. I noticed her face turn white, then bright red. She marched straight to a cell door, threw it open, and pointed inside. "Can I make a phone call first?" I asked. She pointed to the phone on the wall and said, "One." I contacted the law firm that handles my company's affairs. I studied mechanical engineering in manufacturing company, which earned myself and my family a good low to mid 6-figure salary. While I don't deny myself luxuries, I don't feel the need to live like a Rockefeller or an overpaid sports hero. Riley Gordon and Martin. "Hello, this is Drew Pearson. Is Jerry Crane in? Please hold." I listened to elevator music for about 30 seconds before the line was picked up. "Mr. Pearson, Jonathan Riley here. Oh, I need help, Mr. Pearson, but our firm cannot represent you." After several hours, I was brought in front of a county commissioner who set my initial bail. She told me I was charged with solicitation of a minor. I yelled as I leaped to my feet, but the transportation officer's heavy hand on my shoulder forced me back into my seat. Being returned to the precinct, I spent the next several hours calling everyone I could think of. My wife Chase's phone had been disconnected. No one was at work. I knew I had over $600,000 in a savings account. The house was paid for, and I had my business, both of which I could use as collateral. I wasn't ready to pay 50 grand to a bondsman for an obvious mistake. I barely slept before being woken up for breakfast because another prisoner was using it in a short while I and 3 other prisoners were on our way to the district court. We were locked into a holding cell in the basement. "Pearson," shouted an officer, "someone here to see you." "Yes?" I asked as I approached the cell door. "Andrew Pearson?" asked a young woman. "Yes, I am," I replied. "You've been served. Stay the same distance from Chastity Pearson's business and residence. The order also includes the children's schools. Do you understand the order?" I understood, but couldn't comprehend. I barely remember signing the order, opening the first envelope, finished. Any coherent thoughts I had, they were papers for a limited divorce in our state. A final divorce wouldn't be granted until both parties had lived apart for 12 months. Night. I was numb. I panicked when I realized I might never see Melody or Tony again. Chastity had initiated both sets of papers. I knew we were going through a rough patch, but this just floored me. I met her in our junior year of college. I had invented my clamps but wasn't making any money off them. We married after we graduated at 22. Now at 36 my life was exploding with all the force of a supernova. At the bail review, the prosecution added it resisting arrest, which irritated the court. My bail was denied, and I was transferred to the county jail while awaiting trial. Pedophiles have it rough in jail. I was bumped, knocked down, punched, and kicked. I was lucky I wasn't raped or killed because I was locked alone in my cell for most of the time and had a guard escort when I went to the bathroom. couldn't talk to me without a conflict of interest. A defense team was interested up to a point. It turned out that all of my bank accounts had been emptied and closed. I learned through them that a family court judge had placed my business and patents in trust to my children after my arrest, and the pending charges had been splashed all over the media. Chastity had used an old but still valid power of attorney to remove my name from the deed to our house. $522 that I had in my wallet when I was arrested. I found a couple of free lawyers to try to get my money back, but they ran for the hills when Riley Gordon and Martin showed them the error of their ways and the fact that they didn't want to be seen working for a pedophile. I spent all my time in jail cursing Chastity and everyone else who dropped me like a hot potato. After about a month in jail, my court date was a farce. The first time, 30 minutes before my trial, he looked at the charging documents and evidence and told me I was screwed. He said it in legal terms, so it sounded better, but the meaning was the same. During the trial, it was stated that I had gone online and made friends with a 13-year-old girl named Jane Doe. I had tried to get her to meet with me for inappropriate reasons. Appearing in court, there were also 162 pictures of underage girls downloaded to my computer and stored on a flash drive that I was supposed to hide in my sock drawer. I pleaded innocent but was found guilty. The judge gave me 10 years but suspended 5 of those years since this was my first offense, and had the child pornography sentence run concurrent with the solicitation. He also ordered psychiatric counseling and placed me on the sex of. Understatement. I was given my orange jumpsuit and shown to my cell block, which would be my new home for a while. I was sitting at a table in the cell block writing a letter to Melody and Tony, whom I had written to every other day at the county jail, but had not received a response from, despite the fact that I had a more muscular physique than before my arrest. I knew I was in for a rough 5 years at the state penitentiary. He offered prus work to Arends, Blacks, Chinks, and even the Wildem as 13th if they left you alone. Even the warden came down and told us to stay away from you. So what makes you special? Nothing that I know of, I responded. I did feel a small bit of joy. The only bald-headed lawyer I knew was Jerry Crane. I extended my hand. Drew Pearson. The man stared at my hand, but did not move. I know your name already. Tell me your story. I told him. Was accused of being a pedophile. He asked why the court found me guilty. I gently replied that I have no idea where the evidence they used against me comes from. Anyone who does that to a child should have his banana cut off and shoved so far up his bum it'll need to be surgically removed. I almost believed you a Mason boat. As a pedo, I couldn't join any gang and wasn't allowed to associate with the public. I was still doing better than the real child molesters. 3 died and 1 is quadriplegic. No one came to see me. My parents wrote me letters that said we're fine, but how could you? Mom and dad were still my parents, but they couldn't accept what I had been. Completely abandoned me with restraining orders to keep me away from them and their children. I had heard through the prison grapevine that Jerry came by 2 to 3 times a month to provide free legal work for some of the inmates. He was rumored to visit the warden regularly to check on me. Boat was the one who told me about life in the pen. After moping around for the first month, he had a guy smash me against the wall and keep me there while reading me. You're down because your life sucks. Get over it. You're making you herself a target. I was just listening. I began to exercise and train in self-defense, which stopped most of the bullying that came my way. I studied and took classes in the jail library, even taught several engineering courses. Chastity divorced me 1 year to the day after I was arrested. The papers were provided to me immediately after the hearing. She had appointed the ultra-feminist WIC. Alimony and child support payments were calculated based on my earnings from my business and patents because I was a felon in prison. The judge determined that I had no need for money and confiscated all of my assets. The order prohibiting contact or visitation with my children due to my status as a registered sex offender was devastating. Massive prisoners. As Boat watched. Now that I have your attention, instructed Boat, lose the attitude. You got screwed and humiliated by the divorce judge. I've never seen anyone get it so bad, but all that anger is leaking out and it's starting to piss people off. You can't afford to piss people off. What did I tell you when you first got here? I need to survive was my response. Very good. That advice goes for outside of here as well as inside. I'll let you in. Number of non-violent prisoners are being granted early parole. You're scheduled for next year. If you survive. I barely made it. I was knifed by a new inmate who had been mistreated as a child. I was then sentenced to probation. I know most of you think now that I've been paroled it's time for me to get my retribution. Try it when you're a registered sex offender assigned to a halfway house overseen by a nasty counselor and the only job available is night. Before I was released, a man with a degree in engineering told me that Chastity had married Stephen Huntington, who was about to become a partner at Riley Gordon and Martin. It cost me a carton of cigarettes to get their new address. The second day after being released, I was at the park across from their apartment complex after work when my 13-year-old son Tony emerged. I barely recognized him. Lost all of his baby fat to me. He looked positively skinny. Melody at 15 with her long brunette hair down to her waist was the spitting image of her mother, and the two of them hopped on a small white bus and were gone as I wiped the tears from my eyes. It had become a ritual for me to be there every morning to see them get on the buses that took them to their private school. I was able to keep my job, but I had to live on the streets or in shelters. Kicked out of the halfway house 4 months later when two pervs tried to beat me up for being a pervert. Fortunately, I had done a favor for another guy there, and he spoke up to my parole officer when he came by to investigate. After attempting to change the divorce decree with a pro bono lawyer, Jonathan Riley was ruined and had to leave the state. My appeal on my conviction was denied during one of my required visits. My parole officer informed me when Tony was a senior in high school and Melody had just left for her first year at Harvard. I was sitting in the park watching Tony walk to his school bus. He slowed down as he looked across to the park, looked at me for half a second, and waved tentatively before getting on the bus. I was stunned. He couldn't have recognized me. I still exercised and had lost at least 40 pounds since my arrest. At work, being scruffy saved me money on haircuts and shaves I couldn't afford otherwise. I had agreed with the office building's manager to use their restant rooms to get cleaned up. I didn't want any complaints about my appearance or hygiene for the rest of the school year. Tony would occasionally wave at me. I understood he didn't identify me as his father, but rather as a familiar guy who sat alone in the park every morning. Then came in. And I hadn't even noticed him arrive. I immediately looked around for Chastity and the cops, but no one was visible. Tony's expression was nasty, so I suggested he sit down. You look to be down in the mouth. Girl problems? I asked in a growly tone to try to hide it. How do you know? Tony asked in surprise. I chuckled. No disrespect, but at your age that is what it is 90% of the time. My girl and I just broke up. She doesn't like it. Tony seemed to collapse in on himself. Dad keeps telling me that a man doesn't need to listen to his women. They're only good for one thing. A man needs to be a man. Mom rarely talks to me. A man does have to be a man, but he is judged by what? You two were, but you weren't. She trusted you, and you broke that trust, which had to hurt her badly. Tony stood up abruptly. Hey, I told you that you wouldn't like what I had to say. You lost her love and trust. Respect for and from others is everything. My dad has respect from others, stated Tony. Examine the statement you just made. Try reading a couple of Lewis Lamore books. Concentrate on how the main characters act. You can't go wrong by trying to follow. A week later, I found a book by Lost Creek's writer on my bench. The message inside said he had apologized to the girl, but she refused to be back with him. He added that he now recognized it was all his fault and was working to improve himself. After Tony left to attend Johns Hopkins University, I continued to sit in the park every morning. I never saw Chastity or her husband Stephen. Tony waved to me as he came out of the condo building. I lifted my arm to wave back before collapsing to the ground. Mister, you okay? I looked up and saw Tony looking back at me. My eyes drifted back and I lost concentration. Then a hand was placed on my forehead. You're burning up. Come on, we nay. Walking, I paused and pointed. Cart, we'll get it later, he said. I believed my heart would explode with pride at how well he'd matured into manhood. That was shortly before a coughing attack nearly forced me back to my knees. What's going on? Robert the doorman inquired. Call an ambulance, Tony ordered. He soaked all the way through. Do we have any towels or blankets around here? There's a blanket in the closet. I'll get it. Tony lay me down on the carpet. And you doing with that, man? It's the old guy who sits in the park, Tony responded. He's collapsed, feels like he has a really high fever, and his clothes are soaked. I think he might be homeless. A vision of beauty sprang before my eyes, and I screamed out. You don't know what he has there. There could be needles. Tony made a joke about his hair being cut and his uniform being clean. He took my security badge from my pocket and glanced at it, turning white. I realized how close I was to him and Melody. I had to get away before the cops arrived. I was able to roll onto my side before my cough left me too weak to move. My HS like a rag doll, you bastard, Melody exclaimed. You dare to show your face around here? Why aren't you dead? You left us, you abandoned us, didn't want to. Baby girl was forced to, and the entire place went black for weeks later. Chastity Huntington stepped out of the elevator on the 30th floor. Riley Gordon and Martin's law practice used it as their main reception space. She looked like $1 million, or at least $250,000 if you count. Perfect earrings before 7:00 p.m. Huffing in frustration and adjusting the wrap draped over her arms, she turned and motioned for her security to stay where he was. Chastity grinned as she walked down the hallway, recognizing herself in the ornate mirrors. Her body was almost identical to that of her undergraduate years, but having 2 children had caused her cup S up to a C. She passed numerous partner offices before turning and entering the common area with the associate cubicles. Frowning, she noticed the light was on in one stall and went over to it. Melody, you're not even dressed, Chastity said. You know what this dedication means to your father? It's another big step towards him being named a partner. Melody looked up from the stack of papers on her desk and said, Mother, I asked you here under pretext. What really happened? Chastity asked confusedly. What happened to my biological father? Melody quickly sprang up to prevent her mother from leaving, saying, I will never discuss that person again. Mother, it's been 14 years. I know what he was convicted of and that he received a 10-year sentence. I'm your daughter, not your law. Tried to get a 13-year-old girl to be intimate with him, that he never wrote to you or your brother Robert, didn't even call either of you. He abandoned all of us, replied Melody without a smile. She began to grab papers from the top of her desk. Sit down, Mother, let's look at what he was accused of. Enough to warrant a charge of solicitation, and there you have it. His conviction was justifiable. Let's stop this nonsense and go to the dedication, asked Chastity. The problem I ran into was when I checked the dates of those emails, Melody explained, as if she hadn't heard her mother. 8 of the 16 emails sent to the girl were sent when my biological father was in Houston doing a medical conference presentation. I checked, he was there the entire time. He couldn't have, said Chastity. We don't need to bring up all of this unpleasantness again. He couldn't have sent them from his laptop or cell phone, Melody countered, bewildered. All 16 emails were sent from our home computer, which begs the question of who sent them, as 2 of the emails were sent when he was in Houston, and you had taken Tony and me to summer camp. The girl never testified in court, Melody explained. Should have been some indication that the police contacted her and her parents. Another strange thing was the child pornography that was downloaded to our home computer on a single day within 15 minutes, and while he was at work, which was verified by Why Should I Leave It Alone? Mother, it was 14 years ago. There is nothing we can do to change the past, she answered. What I want is to know what really happened, Melody stated firmly. I remember seeing you. Parties we had, you two would also disappear off somewhere together, Tony, and I saw it and didn't like it, but we were too young to understand or say anything about it. Why do you think we never warmed up to him? I also found out that the hall for your and Steven's wedding reception was reserved a month before the arrest. How do you know all that? Shock, Chaz, you should have played Hillary Clinton's game and deleted your emails, Melody told me. I complained to Steven about it one day at work, and it was like we totally understood each other. He was an associate. We got together. We found we were much more compatible than that man and I ever were. She looked a little apprehensive before adding, we wanted to secure your and Robert's future. The way Andrew had it set up was a disaster waiting to happen. You changed it to Robert Huntington because we couldn't have any stigma associated with that man as it was. It took a couple of years before friends and family adopted us. And I believe Daddy dearest Steven adopted us because the patents and business were put in an unbreakable trust for Tony and me. Father did that just weeks before he was arrested. I remember moving from the old house to Steven's condo shortly after my father was arrested, Tony, and I continued to take the school bus to the nearest public school for 2 months. You and Mrs. Gordon returned from shopping one day just as we were doing our homework at the kitchen table. Mrs. Gordon asked how we liked our new school. I told her how packed and rundown it was as a new partner. Despite my dislike for the snobby UNER, she successfully enrolled us in Brightwood Academy the next day, which must have been expensive because it takes time to enroll, said Chastity. That was also the year you and Daddy dearest Steven jet set around the world, leaving Tony and me here alone with a part-time housekeeper who at least kept food in the unit. Apologize if you believe you were neglected as a child. I was about to be tainted by that man's misdeeds and needed to get away from it. You were children, so it wouldn't have touched you. Chast noted it would have if Daddy Dearest Stephen hadn't quickly adopted us and changed our names. Melody replied there were a lot of questions and rumors at Brightwood about our name change that year. For the most part being on our own for a year taught us has ever been in a serious relationship. Tony followed my lead at Hopkins. Tony and I might never have learned about the trust if it hadn't been for a random occurrence. Chastity asked nervously. We met someone after that. We went investigating and discovered the divorce decree and restraining order. The records raised questions about the business, prompting Tony and me to conduct. District Attorney personally assigned the public counsel who would defend my father's case. The firm and business both made significant contributions to his governor campaign. Both over and under the table. Clyde Mullins, the company's general manager, was appointed to CEO with a non-voting share of stock and raised prices on everything by 8 times what they had previously charged. He reports directly to you based on your emails. The Old House and purchased Daddy Dearest Stevens Jr. partnership with the stipulation that he would be promoted to full partner in 4 years. Riley Gordon and Martin will be the business's sole law firm for the next 40 years. According to a letter of understanding, we discovered a large yearly retainer charge that much exceeded what the company had ever paid a lawyer. Here before Tony and I were surprised to learn that you, Daddy Dearest Stephen and Jonathan Riley. Standing up and looking down at her daughter, she said imperially, I have the dedication to get to it, and it appears that you will not be coming with me. We have all done illegal things, but it was to ensure our future. That man refused to listen and had to be removed from the picture. Stephen Jonathan Riley, and I will meet with you and Robert tomorrow to discuss this. Do not endanger yourself in. Put a lock and deadbolt on my bedroom door to keep Daddy Dearest Stephen out. Do you really care? The first time he entered my bedroom, I was lucky he was naked and getting up on the bed when Tony followed him in and smacked him between the legs with his lightsaber. It's unfortunate that it wasn't an actual lightsaber, but I'm sure it was a nasty dream. Woman walked out of an office. Mommy dearest, they are FBI agents. We cannot rely on any governmental agency since the governor will be engaged. You admitted to evidence fabrication, which has been recorded. Electronic recording is readily exhibited throughout the office. Daddy dearest, I on things at the company, even when she wasn't there. You wouldn't believe what she found. She, Tony, and our new CEO have spent the last 2 weeks reviewing the books. The IRS directed Jerry Crane to do the same thing here. In short, we closed all offshore accounts into which funds were transferred from the business. All business and trust accounts have been updated and access is strictly limited. Tony and I have terminated all personal accounts and created. Melody took a piece of paper from her desk and gave it to her mother. This is a court order directing me to surrender any and all of your property to the condo for inventory. The IRS will leave the business account alone. Remained motionless until the female agent nudged her. She removed her jewels and handed them to Melody, who put them in the purse. You send a good man to prison and labeled him a monster just to get rich. She grumbled. You deprived me of my father for 14 years. Mason Boat, a convict, claimed that my father wrote to Tony and me every day. We have never received one. I'm wondering what happened to the letters I sent him. Nothing matters now. Father has been new goods for which we are filing patent applications. The media has been informed of his appointment and all of the arrests. I have congressmen and senators petitioning the president to pardon him. Jerry Crane is already trying to overturn his conviction and remove him from the sex offender list. Melody handed her mother an envelope congratulating her on becoming the world's most hated woman. Contains $522, the exact amount my father had when he entered prison. Spend it wisely. It's the only thing you'll ever get from me or Tony. If you liked today's story, please like and comment below so the algorithm can continue to promote it. If you're new to the channel, please subscribe so I can keep making new stories for you. Thank you for watching and see you in the